Hello and welcome back to Korea.net Star Live, the best place to meet Korea's best creators and artists. I'm your host Hana, and I'm very excited to announce that this is our 10th episode. Our special guest for today is not only an expert who wears multiple hats in the Korean film industry, but he also plays a significant role in introducing Korea's small and big films to international audiences. He's a film critic all the way from Switzerland. Please welcome to the studio, Pierce Conran.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for having me, Hannah. I'm honored to be your 10th guest. Nice big round number, easy to remember. My name is Pierce Conran. As you say, I kind of wear many hats in the industry here. I've been in Korea for 8 years. I am Irish, but I grew up in Switzerland. I'm a big fan of Korean cinema, which is what brought me to Korea in the first place. And these days, I do several things. I work as a writer. I'm a journalist for a website called KOCIS, which is the Korean Film Council's website. I'm a producer for independent films. I work with a director called Chang-wook. I also consult for international film festivals, such as the Fribourg International Film Festival in Switzerland or Fantastic Fest in America, and I also consult for production companies like XYZ Films in LA. So those are a few of the things I do, but mostly I just like to talk about Korean films, go on radio and things like that, and to share my love and hopefully get other people to be interested the way I've become.
Oh wow, that's a lot of hats. I'm super excited to have you here with us today. I love films, and I definitely think I could learn a few more things about Korean cinema from our expert expat, they call you.
I don't know about that. Enthusiastic expat, maybe.
Yeah, so for those of the viewers that may not be familiar with your story, how did you first fall in love with Korean cinema?
I'll keep this short, but I've loved films for a very long time, and I was a collector of DVDs, something we'll kind of touch on later, I think. But I was watching a lot of Japanese films at one point, and I was in my local DVD store in Switzerland, and I was looking through the section of Asian films, and I found something that just looked really, really interesting, really cool and interesting. It had an interesting title and a fancy cover, and so I bought it and I watched it, and I realized it was not Japanese.
Oh.
Actually, I kind of hated it, and the film was Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. But I say I hated it. I hated it at that time because I was just very confused and surprised and shocked by it. But then I couldn't get it out of my mind. And a few weeks later, I watched it again, and then I realized that I loved the film. But I didn't really understand why. This culture was completely unfamiliar to me. At that point, I think it would be fair to say that all I knew about Korea was that there had been a war there, and that there's a place called Seoul there. I'm not really exaggerating. But then I just wanted to learn a lot more about Korean cinema. So I went and got more films, and I started to learn more about Korea proper, and that very quickly became a pretty big obsession.
Yeah, I love that. I remember as well as a kid when I used to go to the DVD store, you just stumble upon things, and I think that's a great way to discover new films and films from countries that maybe you're not familiar with.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that's kind of hard to do these days, I find. I mean, you have things like festivals and stuff like that, and there's a lot of great stuff that's available through Netflix or whatever, but it's not always easy to kind of hone in on it. You're kind of when you're looking at things online, looking through streaming services, they kind of show you what they want you to watch a little bit, and it's not so easy to kind of go off the beaten track and find something new. So that kind of tactile experience of going into a store and finding something completely new, or just looking at covers, is something I wish was a bit more prominent these days.
So you watch Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and get a taste of Korean cinema. What then leads to you getting a job here, moving to Korea, and
it was a few things. I mean, I just started watching more and more Korean Korean films, and beyond loving Park Chan-wook, I loved Chang-dong, Peppermint Candy was one of the first few films I saw, and then of course Director Bong JoonHo's Memories of Murder, a favorite for many people, of course. I wrote my thesis in university on Memories of Murder, and I just kind of kept my passion for Korean cinema alive while I was doing other things. And then honestly, the depression hits, or the economic recession hits, and I had been in America and I had to go back home, and I just couldn't really find a job at that point. And then I was I was working on a website called Modern Korean Cinema, which is a small blog, just something to kind of just keep my interests alive, and that kind of got a little bigger because I had more time to spend on it. And then people told me, well, why don't you kind of consider going to Korea? And I was like, yeah, that sounds quite interesting. So I did come here 8 years ago, but initially I came as a teacher. So I worked in a hagwon in Gwangmyeong, just outside of Seoul. But I was very lucky because I already knew some people through my blog and through Twitter and things like that. People like Darcy Packett, who's someone who's quite well known at this point, and he helped me kind of set myself up here a little bit, and he introduced me to the Korean Film Council, and then through that introduction and through my good fortune, I was able to find a job with them a few months after I arrived here.
Yeah, I read somewhere that you consider Darcy Packett your mentor of sorts. Do you guys meet often?
We do, not always as much as I'd like. We're both very busy with different things, but he has been really instrumental in my being able to establish myself here, and I'm kind of eternally grateful for that. I should mention as well that for the longest time, I've kept promising I'm going to invite him to my home for dinner, and we've set a date several times, but it still hasn't happened after 8 years. So one of these days I need to make good on that promise.
Yeah, well, didn't you invite him?
Well, that's true. No, I forgot. Yeah, he did drop by for dinner not so long ago, and that was memorialized on television, shall we say? But I was thinking more of kind of like have him and his family over, and with my wife as well, and something like that. So I hope we can do that soon.
Yeah, I can imagine you, Darcy Packett, and your wife sat together talking about films. That conversation must go on for hours and hours.
It goes on for a bit. I tend to forget time passing when I'm talking about films, so do bear with me if I run on a bit long.
Oh
sometimes.
No, I love it. So in our intro, you mentioned that you have a lot of different titles and you're very involved in different aspects of film. You're a producer at times, you're a writer at times, you're a critic at times. These days, which title would you say you associate yourself with the most?
I don't know. I mean, certainly I'm a reporter, and most of what I do is reporting about Korean film and being a critic on Korean film. And I'm trying to be more and more involved on the production side. So I produce for this director Lee Sang-woo that I mentioned. I've also written some screenplays for him, and so kind of things like that. And I've produced some short films as well, and worked with some other directors. And I'm kind of trying to explore how else I can do that, but I can't really quit the day job just yet, as they say.
So we can look forward to maybe a short film or a feature-length film from you sometime in the future?
Well, we'll see. I hope so. I hope some people will see some of the films I've produced are very, very small, and not many people have seen them. But I hope I can produce things that more people will watch in the future.
Well, I think, having a day job that involves watching films and, talking about those films to audiences, not only in Korea but abroad, I think that's a wonderful thing. And I heard that, you play a big part in giving Korean titles a push in the international market, especially, smaller features.
I wouldn't exactly say that I have I'm not exactly instrumental, but I think I do my part. There are a few independent films in particular that I think I've managed to help a little bit to get to festivals. The first one I think would definitely be a film called Sleepless Night from the director Jang Kun-jae.
I have a poster right here.
There it is, right there. So Chang-dong. This is a truly wonderful feature film that debuted at the Jeonju Film Festival back in 2012, or won the main prize. It's very simple. It's about a new couple who they've been married for like a year or two, and they're just kind of struggling with their busy lives. But it's just a very comfortable and wonderful film that you can sense this warmth in it, and it's very much based on the experience of the director and his wife, who's also his producer. So it's a very beautiful film, and I managed to see it at a festival that no longer exists called Cindy Festival, Cinema Digital Seoul, and that was actually the last edition in 2012. And I met the director there. I saw the film, and then I kind of helped him to kind of introduce it to several festivals, and yeah, it's he subsequently made another film that got even more exposure. But I was glad to be able to get it at least in a few festivals and get a few international audiences to see it. Like one of them up there is probably the Fribourg Film Festival, which is actually my hometown, and that's a festival I program for. Oh,
that must have been really special for you.
That was really nice. Yeah, I think the main actor went to the festival when it was, because it was screening in competition. And I wasn't there, but my parents went and they took a picture with the actor. That's quite nice.
Oh, that's awesome. So 잠 못 드는 밤, you guys. The next one is called 한공주.
한공주, this was a very memorable one. This would have been 2013 at the Busan Film Festival. It was my second time at the festival, and there were a few films people were buzzing about, and this wasn't one of them. And I remember going to the screening and not really expecting anything at all. And the film was good. And then in the second half, it became something very, very special. I don't want to say what happens because that kind of spoils it, but it becomes something very, very special, and it affected me enormously. So much so that I was in tears at the end, and I had kind of trouble leaving the cinema, and
because you're so emotional.
I was very taken with it, and so immediately once that evening I started talking to a lot of people about it, and again it went to a lot of festivals. This one was actually bought by distributors overseas, including a UK company called Third Window, and so it was released on DVD and stuff like that, and so the film went on to do very, very well, and I won't claim that was because of me. I may have helped it to a few festivals, but it certainly it flew on its own merits, and it won an enormous amount of awards, and so I was very glad about that. And of course, it launched the career of the actress Chun Wook-hee.
Yeah, I haven't watched this film yet, but I'll definitely add it to the list. It looks like an emotional film just from looking at the poster.
But I think it's one of those films. If you can, try not to learn anything about it before going in, because that's that first time watch experience of not really knowing where it's going to go is quite special. Okay.
한공주. And finally, Perse. This was one of my favorites last year as well.
Yeah, this is a film that kind of needs kind of a little introduction at this point. Among the three, this is certainly the one that's kind of become the biggest. So this is the debut film of Kim Bora, who was a wonderful short filmmaker who I'd been I'd been excited about for a long time, and I knew she was making a debut film, and I even knew someone who was producing it, and I was kind of tracking it for a long time. And I have this list I do every year where I do like my most anticipated films of the year, and that was like in the top 10 for like 2 or 3 years running, because it took a while for it to come, and then it finally did, and I was so glad that it's not only did it meet my expectations, it completely went over them. It's a coming of age story, obviously, about that's kind of loosely based on her own experiences. Takes place in the early 90s in Seoul, and it's just kind of about her, this 13-year-old girl, kind of becoming a woman, and just about how her complex family situation and the various relationships that her kind of burgeoning romance stories and the first disappointments of that turn from childhood to adulthood, and it also touches on so many kind of social themes in Korea, and touches on various important moments that really kind of shook the public sphere in the 90s in Korea. It's a very special film, and I think we'll definitely be hearing from her in a very big way. And Obviously, many people feel the same way. It might be the Korean film that's won the most awards at festivals around the world, including like the Tribeca Film Festival and Berlin. And I'm very glad the film's connected. And I don't think I played much of a part in this one, but I was certainly very enthusiastic. And it's like I would tell people about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we've already heard of that one. This one's doing well."
Yeah, I went to a screening where the director was present for the Q&A session, and I got a little signed poster. I have it as one of my prized possessions as well.
I should even say the reason that I knew about her even early on was again because of Darcy, because several years ago, this must be maybe 8 years ago, he organized a little dinner where he's kind of just to kind of bring a few film people together, kind of young people, and kind of so they can kind of network. And so he invited me, and Kim Bora was there, and that was the first time I got to meet her. And so then that's how I became familiar with her and her work, and so that's how I kind of monitored her. So again, Darcy is the root of all this.
Nice. Yeah, I'm always watching out for female directors just because there are so few of them in the industry, but yeah, I find I connect a lot more with features that are directed by directors who are female. Of course.
Yeah. I think this issue of representation is very interesting. I mean, obviously around the world, but we're seeing it a lot in Korea right now, where, as much as I adore Korean cinema, it's a very male-dominated industry. And honestly, I'm a bit sad because, or I had been sad over a few years because, okay, fine, there's a lot of the directors are men, but there had been a huge amount of wonderful actresses, and there were all these films that had like actresses in leading roles, and they're kind of about women, even if they were made by men. But then suddenly all these actresses started getting relegated to supporting parts, and I was kind of a bit sad about that. So it became even more, you end up with like a cast where you have several male stars and one female star, and it's like what's that? It's like it's just tokenism, and it's just I just found that awful. But while I think the commercial industry still has a really major problem, we're seeing just all these wonderful women directors, or films that are maybe still made by men, but that are really very much about women. Like another one that was very successful last year was Yoonhye, Moonlit Winter.
I love that one too.
Yeah, it's really wonderful little film. And so we're seeing more of that, like director Yoon-gun and her films, The World of Us, and The House of Us. So we're seeing more of that, and actually there's one that's I just watched recently called Ijang, Move the Grave. It might be coming out in cinemas very soon, actually. It debuted at Jeonju last year, and it's a wonderful film. It's a male director, but it's about all these sisters who meet up and have to go to their hometown, and they have to move their father's grave because there's like a redevelopment something. And
is that based on a novel? I feel like I've read that.
I'm not sure. I never asked myself that question. That's a good question. But it's a wonderful film that really deals with these different women and their different stories, and how how patriarchy affects them all. And even though we're moving from traditional values into something more progressive, there are still these very lingering kind of patriarchal concerns. So this movie is really in my head right now. So I watched it recently, and I was writing about it just this morning, and I was very impressed with it. So I hope that's a film people will take notice of.
Well, speaking of women directors, you yourself met your special someone in this industry, and she's a very well-known director. And you know what? She left us a comment earlier. Yeah, Kyoung-mi Lee, such a handsome guy, Pierce Conran. So
I had no idea she was going to watch.
So yeah, director Kyoung-mi is a key figure in the Korean cinema industry. Could you tell us a little bit about how you guys met?
Sure. So I'm of course I was a big fan of Kyoung-mi 감독님, and I had seen Crush and Blush many years ago, mise-en-scene, and I really loved that film. And I mentioned this list I do, and I knew she was making a second film, and I had it it was in the top 10 of my most anticipated films a few years running. The title changed a few times. It it was called Home Sweet Home first, 행복한 가득한 집, something like that, and then it became The Truth Beneath. And well, anyway, I was invited to the premiere of the film, and after the film, I was able to go to the after party, the Dutpuri, and then I was sitting there with a friend of mine, Jason, and then this director called Iwon-seok 감독님, who made How to Use Guys with Secret Tips, he kind of came and was like, Pierce, come over here. I want to introduce you to someone. And he brought me to like the middle of the bar, and then he left again. And he brought Kyoung-mi 감독님, and then he kind of introduced us like in front of everyone, and it was kind of like as a joke.
Okay.
And then people were taking pictures and videos, and we were both very, very embarrassed. And I felt I was particularly embarrassed because here I am, I'm a fan, and being introduced in this kind of sort of surreal context. And so I think the first meeting was something of a bust, kind of. We talked very briefly, very politely, and like maybe for a minute, and that was it. But a few days later, I had actually my 30th birthday party, and there were a few directors I'd invited, and one of them is Im Pil-sung 감독님, who made Antarctic Journal, and he messaged me a few days before and was like, Pierce, do you mind if I bring a friend? And I was like, yeah, of course you can. And who did he bring? He brought Kyoung-mi 감독님. And
so the rest is history.
Yes, so that was the first time we got to obviously kind of talk properly and get to know each other, and things kind of moved on very quickly from that.
Wow, that's amazing. I can only imagine like meeting someone that you've admired for a long time, and then end up marrying that person. It's a fairy tale.
It's strange because of course the first kind of times that we met, that was kind of obviously in the back of my mind. This is someone I'm a big fan of, and I absolutely adore her second film. It's one of my absolute favorite Korean films. And I'd seen it the first time just before watching her, just before meeting her, but I watched it without subtitles. So my love for the film wasn't where it was going to be, but I watched it several more times in like early on in our relationship, and kind of came to love the film more as I was kind of getting to know her more, but we were very, very comfortable together, and I mean, even though she's someone I was a big fan of, and all that, I don't know, we just everything was always very comfortable. And I remember shortly after I think we dated a few times, and then I went to a film festival in Switzerland called the Neuchâtel, a fantastic film festival, where I was on the jury, and I was very glad to be on the jury, and I was so excited to go there. But then the whole time I was there, I was kind of very distracted, and I wasn't really able to enjoy myself. And I realized I just really wanted to get back to Korea and see her again. Yeah, so we've always been very, very comfortable together, and obviously we have shared interests, not just cinema. We kind of like cinema for the same reasons, even though we're obviously quite different people. Yeah, we've always been very. Just very, very comfortable, and so I'm very glad. It's obviously all been kind of there's been surreal elements to our relationship. It's basically just kind of been a dream come true for me. With characters in an emotional way, in a very special way. We spoke about very briefly about Byung-hun already. He's an actor I absolutely adore, and I've actually been thinking about him a lot recently because I wrote something about him. And I think we can all agree about Byung-hun is beyond being just an exceptionally handsome gentleman. He has these incredible eyes.
His eyes.
Yeah. And this is what makes us connect with all his characters. He started out as doing all these kind of romantic roles, and that was always very, that always works because there's this kind of there's this emotion that he hides in his eyes, and so that works very well for kind of in the romantic drama context. But then later he started doing these genre films like A Bittersweet Life, and later Akmar Botta, I Saw the Devil. And so he plays much darker roles here, but it's still kind of based on this sort of romantic thing. And so there's this emotion that's kind of deeply kind of in his eyes, and he can kind of he can hint at something, a well of sadness, something broken. So it's like when he's he always plays his characters that are maybe romantic or good characters, and then something very bad has happened to them, and then he that's where the story kind of goes, but that goodness and that devastation is kind of kept in his eyes, and we're able to see his past through his eyes somehow, if that makes any sense. So because I remember when I first came to Korea, a lot of a lot of things that I would edit to, Korean critics writing about local cinema, and when they're talking about actors, they often talk about eyes. So that's kind of one thing. I think there's a much stronger focus on this kind of emotion as it's kind of transmitted through looks and through the eyes. That seems more prominent in Korean cinema compared to the West. I mean, obviously, crying is another part of it, but
there's a lot of crying.
There's
in
a
Korean
lot of crying in Korean cinema and in Korean drama, but I think it's far more interesting than that. So I would hold up again Byung-hun as this fantastic example of a difference between Korean performance and Hollywood performance, and at the same time he doesn't get to use his eyes quite as effectively in his American roles. But that's a whole other discussion. Sorry, I was writing something about this recently.
So, I imagine you watch a lot of movies on a daily basis.
Yes, I do. I watch a few too many. Every day is different, but I guess on average I watch something like 2 or 3 films a day, which I know is seems a little scary.
Are all of those Korean films, or is it a mix?
Oh, it's very much a mix. I mean, I watch about 100 or a little over 100 new Korean films a year, and of course I'll rewatch a lot, or I'll watch older films I haven't seen before. But no, most of the films I watch are international, and some of those are new films that I'll see at festivals or things like that. But a lot of them are just much older movies, and I'm always what I love about cinema is no matter how much time you dedicate to it, there's always something new to find. So I watch these days. I watch a lot of classics from the Hollywood classics from the 30s and 40s. I will watch a lot of genre Italian cinema from the 60s and 70s. Just all over. I just watch. I watch too much.
So do you decide on the programming in the morning? Like today I'll watch this. Or does it come organically?
It does come organically, but also there will be a lot of things I need to watch for work. So I do have it'll be on my to-do list. Watch this film. Watch this film, and I always kind of wonder, do people feel that that's work? But it is. I have to carve out time for it and
that's true.
Take notes for things, and so sometimes Kyoung-mi will come into my office and I'm watching a film, and she's like, "I'm sorry, I'm busy. I'm working." So you're just watching a movie. It's like, well, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there's a difference between active watching and just like laying back and relaxing.
Oh, absolutely. The funny thing is that sometimes the last few weeks I've been quite busy, and some of my work has involved watching a lot of films. I had to watch some films for juries, and I had to write program notes for a festival. So I watch a whole bunch of films, and I had to kind of think about them a lot. But then last time I said, God, I really want to watch a movie. But like just watch a film that I don't have to analyze and just enjoy it. Even though I'd probably watched 20 films in the week or two preceding it. So there's a different mindset to it.
I'm suddenly curious, when you sit down with your wife to watch a movie at home, who picks the movie usually?
It depends. I mean, sometimes there's something we both want to watch. A few days ago, there was the new Charlie Kaufman film dropped on Netflix. I'm Thinking of Ending Things. We both wanted to watch that. We both really, really enjoyed that. And then we watched Tenet recently, and then suddenly we wanted to rewatch some Christopher Nolan films, so I kind of picked them out from the Blu-ray collection. But often what I do is, because I watch a lot more than her, and I'm watching a lot of old films, so what she likes for me to do is sometimes kind of present her with some suggestions. So I'll kind of go, well, here's a stack of Blu-rays, and choose one of them.
Oh, I love that.
And so I'll say kind of vaguely what they are. She'll go, nope, not that, and then she'll pick something. And most of the time she likes it. So that's
yeah, I mean, this is what I always want for Netflix or any other service, to recommend me movies that I'll actually enjoy. So you're. Yeah,
I'm her personal Netflix.
Exactly, your personal curator. So yeah, you obviously have an encyclopedic knowledge of films, just based on what the films you watch annually and throughout your job. So I think this game is perfect for you. It's a speed quiz where we call it movie versus movie. I will mention a keyword, and if you could tell us one Korean film and one international film, we will go through it real quick. So the first one is horror.
Okay, horror.
What's a Korean film?
Korean film. Well, I got one right in front of me, so I'll do this.
Oh, yes.
The Wailing.
The Wailing, 곡성 in
곡성,
Korean.
one of my favorite films. And if you think of a counterpart for Hollywood, I would say maybe The Exorcist. These are both films that deal with with exorcism. One is more on the Wailing is more shamanism, and exorcism, of course, The Exorcist is more Catholicism. So both really landmark films, quite different, but I think they both kind of explore this sort of unknowability of religion that is in a very interesting way. And with they're both very scary and unsettling, again in different ways. But I would, I think they're an interesting pairing.
Okay, the next one, a big plot twist.
Big plot twist. I don't want to reveal the plot twist, of course, but I guess for Korea we would say Old Boy.
Old Boy,
very
a
memorable
classic.
plot twist there. For Hollywood, maybe something like Fight Club. David Fincher's Fight Club.
That's a good one.
Both great films, both incredibly stylish, and very kind of cult, kind of fanboy films. But I think the interesting difference is with Fight Club, you kind of end up with, they're also both based on different texts. But with Fight Club, the denouement, the twist is more psychological, and in Old Boy, it's more from a family standpoint, which I think connects more with kind of the melodramatic roots of entertainment in Korea.
Okay, next one, beautiful cinematography. Which Korean film comes to mind?
For me, probably the most beautiful Korean film, if we're just going to think about the visuals, would be Duelist, Im Young-se's film. It's Hyungsa in Korean, from 2005. And for Hollywood, let's say, one thing I watched with Kyoung-mi not so long ago was Barry Lyndon, one of my favorite films, the Stanley Kubrick film from 1975. They're both very painterly films. I remember particularly Duelist. Duelist is kind of like a sword play. It's a period film with Kang-dong and Ha-ji-won. And the opening scene takes place in like an old dusty market. And there's all these characters kind of rushing around in very colorful outfits. And there's all this kind of dust being kicked up from the ground. And there's this really extraordinary shot from the film where like it's just all these characters kind of all over each other. And actually this shot has been kind of memorialized. When I used to work at the Korean Film Council office when it was in Seoul, in the corridor outside of where I worked, there was this massive still image from that film as well. And I really wanted it actually, but it would have been too big for my apartment. And Barry Lyndon is again it's very painterly. A lot of these gorgeous shots that are actually based on old landscape paintings from like the 17th century. So both incredibly different movies, but aesthetically there's something very interesting about them that kind of combines them in my mind.
Nice. Next one, best bromance.
Best bromance. I mean, in terms of like a recent bromance for Hollywood that I absolutely adore, it would be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Of course, you have Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio there. There's something. It's kind of really. There's all that kind of nostalgia for Hollywood in an old time, and how their relationship kind of sort of has to change, and it's really a beautiful bromance, and also just a very, very cool one. And for Korea, it's very different, though. I would say something like Inside Men, and that's here we have. It's more of an Lee Byung-hun film, but certainly you have Lee Byung-hun and Cho Sung-woo, who have their kind of something that becomes a bromance later in the film. I think the difference there is with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's more about their friendship kind of changing over time, and with Inside Men, it's a Korean film. There has to be a social angle, so their friendship is created because of a shared problem, like shared problem of like a social ill in Korea. So both great films.
Yeah, and brilliantly acted by Lee Byung-hun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, for the sake of time, we are going to move on to our close-up corner. Okay, we mentioned earlier that Conran's favorite movie is Memories of Murder, and his very first film was Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, right?
Yes, that's right.
So we wanted to know your list of the top 5 must-watch Korean films. And I'm sure this list changes.
Oh God, constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Memories of Murder is my favorite Korean film, but I won't choose that one because I'd like to kind of perhaps introduce something that people might not know about. One film I just absolutely adore is Castaway on the Moon.
Castaway on the Moon.
From 2009. And this is the story, the really rather brilliant story of a salaryman who's drowning in debt and wants to kill himself. So he jumps off the Maple Bridge, but then he washes up on Pamsam Island in the middle of the Han River, and he becomes stuck there. So it's essentially Robinson Crusoe in the middle of Seoul. And there are so many layers to the film. Obviously, it's very, very funny, and it's a very interesting novel plot, but it touches on a lot of kind of a communication issues and kind of the paradoxical issue where we're also hyper connected, but we're suddenly so disconnected as well, and the film visualizes that in a really extraordinary way, and just so that's a favorite of mine. I would also say one of the great classic Korean films, Hanyo, The Housemaid, by Kim Ki-young, from 1960. Obviously, a big influence on people like Park Chan-wook and Bong JoonHo. But this is just a really terrific, twisty, kind of a noir melodrama that I just highly recommend. And anything by that director, Kim Ki-young, truly extraordinary. I'm glad that people are starting to watch his films more overseas. He's becoming a big name, and I hope that's his fame. His posthumous fame continues to increase. I would also choose Chang-dong's Bakasatan, Peppermint Candy, which was the second Korean film I saw, and that's the film that really kind of taught me about Korean cinema, Korean history, particularly about the May democratization movements in Gwangju. I would also say Park Chan-wook's Pakchi, Thirst. Obviously, I love Old Boy, I love Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, but the more and more I watch Pakchi, I feel like it might be my favorite Park Chan-wook film.
How many times have you watched it?
Not that many. I think when I say not that many, I've probably seen it 4 times. But it's very, very unusual, and it's unique in a way only his films could be. And it's a film that really rewards repeat viewing for me. And then, of course, I would be remiss not to mention one of my absolute favorite films. I've already said The Truth Beneath by a certain director.
By the one and only, Kyoung-mi.
But really an extraordinary film that... and it's a film that, of course, I've seen many, many times, and I find new things each time I watch it, and truly, truly great. Unfortunately, not enough people have seen it, so I highly recommend to go and watch it if you're able to find it. I know it's available on Amazon Prime.
Wow.
So that would be the 5.
Yeah. So was that 5?
Yes.
Memories of Murder, Castaway on the Moon, The Housemaid, Thirst, and Peppermint Candy.
And The Truth Beneath, yeah.
And The Truth Beneath,
Right,
of
so I
course.
cheated.
Yes. So I think people are, getting a lot of ideas for what films to watch, especially in regions where they're still in lockdown. So yes.
So James has mentioned a very good one there. Save the Green Planet, one of my favorite films. It's actually the first Korean film I saw in a cinema. I was completely alone and I had no idea what the film was. And it's still one of my favorite cinema experiences.
So as you were talking us through your favorite films, you mentioned that in Korean cinema, usually there's some sort of class struggle, and there's a social commentary. And I think this is very specific to the Korean genre. Could
Absolutely.
you talk a little more about that?
I mean, what first kind of made me notice Korean films was just how well made they were, and I didn't really expect that from a country that I didn't really know much about at the time. But what really hooked me was the fact that all of these films, no matter how stylized they are, they talk about something. Obviously, Korea has gone through a lot the last 100 years have been very difficult, and there's been, whether it's been the colonial era or the separation of the peninsula, the Korean War, and successive military dictatorships, the IMF crisis, just constant trauma, after trauma, and these films deal with these traumas in really fascinating ways. Obviously to varying degrees, but it's pretty much a given that a Korean film is going to talk about social issues. And they do it so well, combined with good storytelling and fantastic production values. That really kind of makes for a very compelling package.
And I guess Parasite is a good example of such a film.
It's a singular example. It's a superlative one. It's obviously a masterpiece. It's brilliant. It does all that and more, and it's such a layered and impressive film, and just so entertaining as well. And that's what makes it so special. And that's why I think it really crosses the barrier. That's why a lot of these Korean films do that, where they're meaningful and weighty, but they're just enjoyable and beautiful to watch.
Have you ever crossed paths with director Bong JoonHo?
I have actually. He was the first Korean film person I ever met, and how I met him was quite surprising, because I was at Luton Airport in London, a very small airport. I just arrived, and I was waiting for a bus to go to a town called Coventry to speak at an Asian cinema conference, and I was at Burger King eating something before my bus would arrive, and I saw these people on the table, and one of them just kind of was like, "Could that be? That's not." No, it's not. So I looked again. No, it can't be. Is it? And then I double, triple, quadruple taked, and sure enough, it was director Bong JoonHo. And so I was very shy about going up to him, but eventually I realized he was leaving. And just after he'd emptied his tray, he turned around, and I'm just there. It's like, hi. I think I might have said, 안녕하세요 to him. That probably the first time I spoke a Korean word to a Korean person. And he was there to meet some actors. This was before he made Snowpiercer.
I see.
And yes, that was the first time I met him.
Wow, that experience in itself is like a movie. It's a Burger King.
It was kind of I can't lie. It definitely felt like a sign.
Yeah.
And then 3 months later, I moved to Korea.
Okay, we are quickly running out of time, but
sorry, I did warn you. I do kind of tend to run on.
No, but I love it. I wish we could do this for 2 hours. So yeah, before we run out of time for real, I thought it'd be nice if we could talk about some cinematic terms. Being a film critic, I'm sure you look at films in a very different way than maybe the average viewer does. And so we have a few scenes from movies here, and we thought it'd be nice if we could start with homage.
Right.
Yeah, homage is, what's an homage?
Well, an homage is a French word for essentially a dedication. So it's when a filmmaker wants to reference something that they liked in maybe a previous film in their own film.
Right.
So you have here an example where there's the famous whole octopus eating scene in Old Boy, which was, I guess, referenced by Kong Island.
Right.
And I guess that's what you would call a pretty clear reference. We call that homage. It's like a loving nod to something that the filmmaker liked, appreciated before.
I have a few more here. Old Boy we talked about, and once again in Kong Skull Island.
Right.
Yeah.
This is that brilliant scene in Old Boy, the
corridor
that
fight.
one-shot corridor.
Yeah.
And so there's that shot has been, I think, referenced in a few films. But yeah, one of them would be. That is not Kong Skull Island. That is
this is Kingsman.
Is this the first or the second Kingsman? No, it's the first one.
This is wrong,
Yeah.
guys. This is Kingsman, the Secret Agent.
Yeah, this is the first one. So again, there's that aesthetic is kind of like lovingly copied, mimicked.
There's like all this chaos in the background,
right.
and then somehow the person who's standing up front is very calm.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember it clearly, I have to say, but I do recall there being maybe there's a bit of an Old Boy reference there.
We have another here. This is from the villainous Angyo, and then the John Wick homage to this motorcycle scene.
I've seen the first two John Wicks. This is from the third one, Parabellum. I haven't seen it yet, but this shot was in the trailer, and the moment I saw the trailer, I was like, oh my god, that's absolutely a dead ringer for the motorbike fight scenes in the villainous. I guess there's also the issue of there's homage, which is like like loving, referencing, borrowing. There's other words for this as well. There's like parody, there's like pastiche, and there's also just plain stealing. So it's not always clear what one is.
Don't steal, guys. Yeah, so I haven't seen Angyo, but I have seen the scene from John Wick, and this motorcycle sequence was awesome.
I heard it's really cool. Yeah.
So I guess it's time now for me to go back and watch the film that it was originally
The film
from.
has some very, very impressive, very impressively choreographed action scenes in it, for sure.
Okay, I'm sure everyone has seen Old Boy. Let's talk about the next one, mise-en-scene. This is another term that we see often.
So it's another French term, and mise-en-scène means kind of put in place, and it essentially it's all the tools available to a director to kind of bring the script to completion. So it's like production design, costuming, it's music, it's also editing, it's obviously cinematography, it's all that, and it's all these decisions that a director makes in tandem with the heads of all those departments, and so in terms of how to tell their story.
So is there a Korean film that kind of stands out for its beautiful execution in terms of its mise-en-scene?
I mean, there are plenty of examples. I already mentioned Duelist, which really has stunning mise-en-scene, but I think a really good example would be The Handmaiden, Park Chan-wook's Agassi, which has this very, very rich, engrossing mise-en-scene. It has stunning cinematography, the most beautiful, ornate costumes and production design, obviously beautiful music and all the rest of it. It's just very, very rich and engrossing mise-en-scene that kind of really kind of pulls you in. So that's a very it's a very ornate but very effective kind of mise-en-scene.
Yeah, that's definitely a film that you need to see in the movie theaters.
For sure.
Well, I mean, with all films, I think, but
you always hope you can. Obviously, these days, exercise caution and judgment, but yes.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about The Handmaiden, but in Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, 친절한 금자씨, this would be another example of the mise-en-scene in this film.
Right, so there's this is kind of like mise-en-scene isn't just always about style and about creating mood. It's about kind of transmitting certain pieces of information. And so Park Chan-wook really cares about the details in his films, particularly costuming. He has some of the best costuming in Korean cinema is in his work, and Sympathy Mr. Vengeance is a great example. So we have Gunja, the main character. She wears this interesting coat, and there's this kind of collar on it that's that kind of it covers her except for her eyes, so she kind of becomes the observer in certain scenes, and I think it focuses her revenge, and it creates makes it very clear to the audience what her goal is. Her goal is very, very single-minded. It's literally kind of blinders. All she cares about is this revenge, but it also that means it kind of brings us more into the revenge and makes us kind of complicit in it, and we kind of derive a certain pleasure from her achieving her mission. So there's a very special, twisted elements to the film that I really adore. That's a good example.
And she also has that iconic red eyeshadow
Absolutely.
in the film, which I think was possible because it was her. Young could pull it out off the eye makeup.
Sure, right. Sadly, that was she took a long break from the screen after that.
Yes. So another term is cliche. But for me, for some reason, the word cliche has like a negative ring to it.
It's cliche is essentially a stereotype. It's something that has grown tired. That used to be interesting and novel, and over time, by force of incessant repetition, it's become bored and cliched. So
I remember in another radio show you were talking about how in Korean cinema there are so many car crashes.
Yes, this is one of my pet peeves in Korean cinema. There's so many times I'll see it's someone, a conversation, or people out in the street, and someone will walk on the street. It's like they're going to get hit by a car right now.
Yeah.
And you see it so often that you know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And the problem is that robs the effect of what you're trying to hand to do. There's no surprise if you know what's going to happen. So at that point, it's become a cliche.
Yeah. There's that, and also in many disaster films that we've seen recently, what's a cliche that you've noticed?
I mean, I think for, generally in disaster film, I guess you have that kind of the expert who goes against the government to kind of try and who really knows what the problem is. That's a pretty standard disaster cliche. But for Korean film, the cliche or the way that Korean disaster films are built is around melodrama. So you have particularly, I mean, Exit is a good example, Pandora. I think maybe even Haeundae would be like even the best example where you have that's the tsunami hitting Busan film. And the first half of the film is just all these families and characters around the community, and you get to know them. And then the disaster thing only happens halfway through. Same with the tower is quite similar. So that seems a very specific Korean cliche for the disaster film.
They set it up, and it's like, now it's your time to cry.
Yeah, so we want to spend an hour to make sure you care about these characters, and now we're going to kill them.
Romantic films. This is another cliche.
Well, the classic cliche for a Korean romantic drama, not just Korea, I think Japan is guilty of this as well, is the terminal illness drama.
Oh, yes.
There are a lot of them. And some of them are upfront about it, and some of them aren't. And it's like, okay, you haven't told me you haven't hinted that you're a terminal illness film yet, but you're going to at a certain point, and I'm going to be annoyed when that happens.
Are these good examples of this?
Well, these are kind of, I would say, these are kind of like variants on it. So the thing about, cliches exist, but I think you can also embrace a cliche and make a twist on it. So A Moment to Remember is a wonderful film that obviously brought Son Ye-jin to a lot of people's attention, among others. And rather than a terminal illness, she suffers from kind of a very early onset dementia. So you start kind of losing her memory, which is very poignant in a romantic story. And it's also just an interesting twist on the terminal illness drama. Now, always. I haven't seen it in a long time. Obviously, we have a character who's blind there rather than having a terminal illness. And I'm also reminded of another one, a film called Pained. From I think it's about 10 years ago, where one character is a hemophiliac and another has no sensation.
Okay.
And so can't feel any pain.
Okay.
I can't remember very clearly. It was trying to do a twist on it. I don't think it worked very well.
Sounds very complicated. Yeah. So I honestly haven't seen many films recently where the female lead gets sick or has a terminal illness.
But it's fallen out of favor completely.
I'm kind of glad.
Absolutely. But also sadly is with kind of streaming exploding and with blockbusters kind of starting to control the marketplace, even for Korean films. I think romantic dramas have steadily kind of disappeared. They used to be coming out every couple of weeks, but now you might have 2 or 3 a year. So I mean, that's a pity. Obviously, people can watch romantic stories on the small screen. Those are still very, very common here. But big film romance is sadly quite rare these days.
Yeah, I'm hoping they'll make a comeback because I think in these times when you're stuck at home, watching films on your laptop. Rom-coms, those are the feel-good movies.
Absolutely, no, I get that, and I'm sure there are some projects that come to mind that have been announced. Hopefully, they'll be good.
So, how has this past year looked for you as a film critic, as somebody involved in the film industry? I'm sure this pandemic has affected everyone involved. How has it affected you?
Well, me personally, thankfully, not a great deal. I've been very lucky. A lot of the work I do is kind of online and freelance anyway, so I'm very fortunate. But obviously, others haven't been quite so fortunate. A lot of people who I work with have had trouble with people who work for festivals overseas. Obviously, festivals have had to either be cancelled or pivot to online. Productions have had to slow down a lot. Again, Korea's been quite lucky with that. There have been some stoppages, but for the most part, productions kept going, cinemas have remained open, and relative to worse situations in other parts of the world, things look a little better here, but it's still pretty devastating. And I worry because you have some of the big companies can maybe weather this, big studios can just kind of hold back their lineups, but little companies, little indie film production companies or distributors who can't afford to wait 6 months to release something, who need that cash flow to keep going. This is disastrous for them. So I feel for them, and I hope that either the situation will resolve itself quickly enough that they can kind of start making money again, or that a new alternate model that is viable for them could be reached.
I think, though, also it's a good time for the film industry to readjust itself, because I think for a while films that were released on Netflix weren't considered at international film festivals, isn't that?
Just Cannes. There was, Okja, Bong JoonHo's Okja went to Cannes, and that was the last film to go to Cannes. But I think they didn't do a physical Cannes this year, but they had they put Cannes labels on films. Peninsula was one of them. They might have been Netflix films, I can't remember. But certainly, at this point, it's impossible to ignore Netflix's artistic contribution. Certainly last year we had Marriage Story and The Irishman. This year, Charlie Kaufman's film, I think, is going to be some kind of a contender. David Fincher's new film is coming as well. I think that'll be a big, probably be a big Oscar contender. So, and now that Netflix is really ruling the roost because people can't really go to the cinemas, the game is changing very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think TV shows are such a big part of life now.
Absolutely. And Korean TV shows are becoming a part of life overseas as well. I mean, K-dramas have been popular for a while, and they've kind of grown in popularity. But this year, I feel that that growth has spiked, and I think that's great. That provides new opportunities. Once things settle down a bit, of course.
Okay, so you guys have been sending in a lot of questions, and I think they're sad to let you go. So let's spend some time answering these questions. While we were talking about, different cinematic terms, they've been very curious about you, about the film industry. Are there any questions that catch your eye?
Let's see. Well, and by all means, if you see something interesting, let me know.
Cynthia Wong asked, as a foreigner in the film industry, what challenges has he faced? Hey Jude wrote in Korean, I thought cliches were bad, but that's probably not always the case.
Cliches are certainly not always a bad thing. I mean, there's there's the concept of the guilty pleasure, I guess, for example, where a cliche can be kind of an enjoyable, comfortable film. It's a familiar thing. So we can enjoy cliches, and it puts you in a safe space. And sometimes when you're trying to escape from a difficult, busy lifestyle, that's what you want. You want that familiarity. So there's something to be said for cliche, but it all depends on each example.
This is kind of funny. Hey Jude said, 재난 영화에는 항상 말 안 듣는 사람들이 있음. So in a disaster film, there's always somebody who just won't listen to the authorities.
This is the expert who has to kind of go against the grain.
Should we give a gift card to Hey Jude? I
Sure.
think. Hey Jude. Hey Jude, thanks for sending in so many questions.
There's so many questions, guys.
Yes.
I wish I could.
Anything else? We'll take
time to answer all of them.
one or two more, and then unfortunately we'll have to wrap up. But I think you should do this more often. A lot of our viewers have been saying, please do this kind of format more often.
I'd be happy to.
February asks to Pierce Conran, if you could describe Korean cinema in one word.
Oh, that's a tough question, February.
February has been with us from the start, and you don't know this person personally.
I don't believe so. Korean cinema in one word. Original, I'll go with original.
Original?
But that's a very difficult question. I'd need to think about it a bit more to come up with a clever answer.
February is very excited. Wow. Okay. I think that's all the time
Okay.
yeah, we have
Sorry, guys.
to answer
I
the
wish we had more
comments.
time. Yeah, I appreciate everyone sending in all these questions.
Yes, but we certainly look forward to seeing you on more shows and talk shows.
Yeah. If anyone wants to have me on, I'd be happy to
and
waffle
I feel
on
like
about
we
Korean
could
films.
have just picked a few movies to talk about, and we would have.
I'm sorry, we didn't even get to talk about my Blu-rays. I have my Blu-rays here for the
Yeah,
Wailing.
we have some of his Blu-rays from his
Parasite.
collection.
And my 30 screen crutch Marlene Dietrich.
Okay, so I think we're gonna have to have you on a second time.
I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you for our viewers, uploading so many questions to our live chat, and for loving Korean cinema. We certainly hope to see more Korean films hit the international stage in the years to come. Okay, so I think that's all for today. Next week we'll be joined by one of the most followed Korean beauty creators, Sinnim. So if you are into Korean beauty makeovers, please make sure to join us next week, Wednesday. But for us, I think that's it. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.